it's easy to forget the importance of this kind of gathering information from the world, because we sort of exist. Oh, sorry. Because we sort of exist in this world where calories are kind of in a big way no longer relevant. And so I guess we think of babies um, as sort of pulling information from the world um, for enjoyment, or because toys are there or something. But actually, there's got to be some sort of uh, I guess, reason that we explore things the way that we do, and maybe this reason sort of unites us with the other primates. And I find this idea really cool. Um, and I think that we in the MRC project have a really great way to sort of look at the unity between the sort of visual search and foraging behaviors and how foraging behaviors differ, maybe in kids with ADHD. Um, so to get started, like, what is foraging? So in behavioral ecology, there's this sort of model for how animals explore spaces around them to sort of maximize resource gathering, and this is in physical space, not visual space. And it's sort of an unsolved problem how animals know when to um, move on from a patch that they're sort of foraging in, um, and when they sort of need to stay and exploit, and how quick they're depleting the resources in a patch versus when they move. And of course, there's sort of a trade-off there because you don't want to stay until your patch is completely depleted because then you have no food. But it also takes time to travel between patches. So there's always this sort of trade-off, and how do animals kind of make that decision is sort of an unsolved problem. Um, but of course, we know that the brain is made for much more than just foraging, right? Like animal brains do way more than just forage stuff, particularly human brains. Um, so as Carl Sagan says here, the brain is doing a lot of other stuff besides foraging. Um, and one of the really important things that it's doing is gathering information from the senses. So the authors say, or sort of hypothesize, that all kinds of cognitive functions might follow on from this sort of evolved visual foraging, or not visual foraging, but foraging sort of capability. So what they expect to see is that maybe something like searching for information also follows these same sorts of rules. And in particular, also gathering information from the senses. So I guess this is sort of viewing the sensory space as a physical space that you explore and exploit. Um, and they choose to do this through vision. Um, and vision is really interesting to look at this stuff because it's very active. So, and I'm really ignorant about other sensory modalities, but what they say is that other sensory modalities are kind of passive. And vision is unique in that you shift your gaze towards what provides most information in a scene. Um, but it's not a sort of passive one-way process. So you also sort of see more information in what you look at. And this is described as a sort of active vision loop. So sort of these two um, factors are sort of influencing each other to sort of make you zero in on one particular bit of a scene to sort of look at and sample from. Um, and as I said, like this sort of active sampling is really unlike other sensory modalities. And the author's sort of idea here is that maybe this is something like it is to explore a physical space. Um, so the way that, oh, sorry.
But the idea of if you stay too long at a tree, you eat all the apples on that tree. There's no exploit trade-off there. Yeah. The cost is, I thought the cost was the energetic cost of shifting the focus of your attention.
Yeah, so that is the trade-off, right? Like,
yeah, you just said about eating all the apples off the tree, but that doesn't matter if there's no such thing as there's no equivalent for that when you think about how you shift your attention around a scene or something like that.
Yes, well, I think, I mean, in the same way that you're sort of dealing in these cases with uncertainty, in that like there might be a super rich apple tree that you can't see, and there might not, and you might starve to death. I guess in the same way, there might be something really interesting in the scene that you want to fixate on, or there might not, and you waste a bunch of time
Yeah,
saccading around a
yeah,
scene and you don't need it. Um,
yeah.
so um, I guess it's sort of they're making this analogy between sort of informational resources and physical resources. And I guess a lot of the time that's going to be the same thing, as in there's something in your environment that you want to exploit. Um, but I guess just in terms of just sampling, if you think of sampling, maybe like eating an apple or something, or getting information is like eating an apple, and eventually you're going to eat all the apples. Does that make sense?
Mm.
And yeah, I guess there's not just an energetic trade-off. Maybe there's also like you're sort of punished if you don't pick up some information that's really important from your environment. So it could be that you find something really interesting, you fixate on it, um, but it's kind of the wrong thing, maybe. And maybe there's a sort of punishment there. Um, well, okay, so instead of this, like I was saying, instead of this physical exploration, um, in sort of vision space, uh, we move between periods in which you can sort of statistically associate um, locations, like so where they're sort of not quite constrained to one exact point, but sort of are in an area around it, called fixations. And then you get these jumps between fixations called saccades. And this has been, from pretty early on in eye tracking research, established as the way that um, animals seem to explore scenes. So, we don't have this sort of um, search strategy that you could imagine where it's sort of naive and you just scan a scene. That actually there seem to be these sort of periods where you fixate on something and extract information from it, and periods where you jump between it. And during these jumps, actually no information is being sampled. So it's all about the fixations. And a big sort of unsolved problem is, why do you get fixations when you get them, and why do you get saccades when you get them? And how do these sort of come together to allow you to extract information from a scene? Um, and it seems
Wait,
as if, oh, sorry.
how do we know that no information is being sampled or being taken in
That's a really
during
good
the
question.
saccade?
I don't remember the details, but I think it's done using EEG. And also
Hey,
you can present stimuli during a saccade as well.
yeah.
And that you won't get things like preferential looking. I think that's how they've sort of done it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
if you flash, they do gaze contingent stuff. They flash something up during a saccade, and
yeah,
people are unaware of seeing it.
yeah,
It's the weirdest thought, but if you think about it, if you stay conscious as your eyes were moving, you'd get this big blur of light just flashing across the retina
mm,
that you wouldn't make sense of it. It's a really weird thought, but we have these moments of blackness. It always freaks me out when I think about it. We have our experience of reality. There's these moments of blackness interspersed where we just don't know what's happening while we're circadian.
I guess
yeah.
it could. Oh, sorry.
There's a literature on trans-circadic effects, isn't there? What? But I don't know it that well.
I don't even know what transcircadian means.
Isn't that during a saccade?
Oh, okay, fine.
Mm, I mean, I guess it could be something analogous to how the motor cortex stops being sensitive to feedback when movements are happening, right? Like, what you don't want is for this continuous updating while you're moving to something new. So maybe it kind of makes sense from I don't know, like there's a general principle of the brain or something.
Marta, was there anything on this? Because this obviously ties in really nicely to the paper that we were talking about. You presented last week, Kramers and Smith. Except that's all about looking at stuff neighbouring, close by. Yeah. But they never talk about this occasionally or take a big jump. What Tom's talking about now, these moments where when you're exploring a scene, you do lots of stuff that's close by and then you take a big jump somewhere else. But they don't talk about that taking a big jump ever, do they?
Yeah, I think in terms of proximity, no, they didn't. No. But it might be that it falls within the, like, there is like this repeated, like, exploratory events where they happen in the same toy, and then they have these other events where it's more like foraging around. So they might fall in those other like bursts of randomness. But no, in terms of proximity, they didn't know. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I think is really interesting about this paper, and is part of the reason I picked it. Um, Firstly, I guess that it does try to account for that. I guess you could think of this in terms of sort of that decision between exploiting a toy that you have and jumping to another toy, which is like another patch in physical space. And like the sort of author's idea about uniting this physical search and visual search is that there's this common cognitive sort of method underpinning it. And so I think their idea is like you could end up with something predictive of jumps to new toys. But something, so I'll get to this a bit later, but something else that I find really interesting about this stuff is that they bring in short-term memory. And I think for the sort of predictability stuff we've been looking at, and that sort of information theoretic trade-off between predictability and like memory capacity, maybe there's something there. But maybe we can talk about that when we get to it. But yeah, I think part of what they're getting at, and they don't call it burstiness, but is accounting for that sort of exploitation of a single toy versus leaping to another. Does that make sense? Cool. Okay, so something that's kind of interesting about saccades and fixations is that they do tend to stabilize on regions that are rich in information. So it's not just as if we're sort of leaping around randomly. It seems as if there's some strategy there which enables us to, well, animals generally, to sort of extract this information from the environment. And sometimes this is sort of stimulus driven. So this, like the authors give the example of density and brightness, but also stuff that's semantically meaningful. So that's personal. Like I want to find my phone, even though it's like a black, very boring rectangle. It has a great deal of semantic meaning to me. So I really want to find that. Sorry, someone's like ringing the buzzer a lot. It's really distracting. So somehow the brain has these strategies for finding these very meaningful locations and exploiting them, as in sort of gathering information from them. And like I said, the sort of author's central thrust is that this is really similar to animals foraging in an environment. And that maybe there's this sort of unity in cognitive functions. So maybe foraging is a sort of foraging in physical space becomes a sort of prototype for foraging in visual space, but also foraging in sort of idea space and things like that. So they come up with a few examples. Does this make sense to everyone so far? Yep, okay. So how do animals decide like when to leave the current patch that they're exploiting in a sort of optimal way, so that they're you know, you can think maybe that completely exploiting. Oh, goodbye, Emily. Completely exploiting a patch and then moving to another that's unknown, and then moving to another that's unknown is kind of maybe, given the presence of uncertainty, like not always an optimal way to do this. So the marginal value theorem is all about like when an animal should make that decision to leave a current patch. And this should be when the current reward rate, so you can think of like apples per second or something, falls below some global average reward rate of the environment. And this is a really interesting idea, and I think that I don't fully get the sort of the details of it. So I had some questions like, how does an animal know what the global average reward rate of an environment is? But apparently this is used like really successfully in neuroscience already. So some of you probably know way more about this, and I hope you did. This sort of drift diffusion model formalism. So I guess this is probably something, and I didn't have time to read about it, but probably something very analogous to this sort of exploitation. I'm thinking like Tom Northrop or something. Maybe you.
No,
Okay,
I don't know anything about this. Sorry.
it's a neuroscience thing. I don't know. I don't know anything about it.
I think I know a little bit about this. So it's like how well the accumulated evidence is used. And then if it's not used well, the drift is bigger, I guess.
Oh, is the drift like a
Drift.
drift? Oh, sorry.
No, I was just about to say something as you, Tom. You said it.
Is the drift like a sort of drift in ocular space, or is it a drift in terms of like state, and then if if the state goes outside some bound, it flips to another one and they move, or is that what you were going to say, Sam?
Yeah, but I don't know. Ishul?
I don't remember. I'll give more information after I look it up. Sorry.
The
Oh,
only
no,
thing
Tom.
I know about this is they did actually a model of saccade planning. Did you look at this? Tim Smith and the thing, but it was it was like abstract feature space that the kind of the urge to saccade kind of accumulated over time, and then the rate of information content. So I think they did a computational model trying to predict when people were going to shift their eyes based on this model, but I can't remember it very well. Did you read it? I can't remember. Did I send that to you? I can't remember.
I don't know that well. Sorry.
Anyone else know anything about these?
Well, I think to be fair, the authors do say that there's a lot of open problems in the sort of marginal value theorem space, and this is, I guess, most basically whether animals really do use the marginal value theorem, but also a lot of stuff like what constitutes a patch, and things like that. So I don't think this is like claiming to be a unified theory of how animals truly select in the real world, but it does give us like a foundation for understanding optimal decision making. And I think the author's sort of central thrust is that, well, this is a good model for foraging behavior. We have results in foraging, and so maybe we should get good results in visual search if it really is the case that saccades and fixations are actually all about exploring a patch in the way that you do with marginal value theory.
By the way, I just briefly read it about the drift diffusion model. So it's one's ability to collect valid information. Like once you have reached a certain threshold of valid accumulated information, then you drift towards a certain choice. It's like you being more sure or like adamant about the direction towards the accumulated evidence. If the
That
drift
makes sense.
is high, then you're more certain about the choice you're making based on the evidence you have.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, it sounds very similar, but kind of more abstract brain spacey than like physical space. So how did the authors sort of look at this? Well, when I started to look over these methods, I had some problems sort of getting from what the authors were trying to look at, and what the methods showed. So maybe what I hoped was that we could sort of explore that. Guys, could you help me to understand it? Because like I said, I think that this idea is really interesting for us. So I hope to use it, and I hope to sort of make sure that I understand this link. So the authors looked at an eye tracking data set, and this was with adults, so not infants. And sort of at a very high level, they want to see how gaze behavior and fixation behavior changes when faces stored in short-term memory are presented in a series of faces versus not. So they want to look at like when these gaze transitions happen, how long people fixate, and through this to show these parallels between patch forging theory and human visual exploration. So the first thing they had was this sequential recognition task. So the overall paradigm had a single face presented first, followed by multiple faces, and multiple faces presented first, followed by a single face. And this was counterbalanced, but for the purposes of this experiment, they just paid attention to the single first condition, and they didn't care about the other. So participants basically were shown a single face for 200 milliseconds, followed by a fixation cross, then 4 faces, then a fixation cross. And they say the reason that they showed the multiple faces for a longer time was basically because there were more faces. So the participants needed more time to sort of explore the scene. And they had to press a key indicating if a single face was present in multiple face pictures. The answer was correct half the time and incorrect the other half. And they were given like a small amount of money if they got it right, something around $3. Okay, this is kind of a boring bit, so I just copy pasted it from the paper. But basically, they did some practice before the block, and they removed participants if, for instance, the calibration was off, or they scored more than one standard deviation apart from the rest of the participants. So they ended up excluding 11 participants for this reason, which seems quite high, and excluding people over one standard deviation seems quite harsh to me. I don't know if anyone has any opinions on that, but it seems kind of plausible that some people would have results more than one standard deviation away from the others. Okay.
Is that above or below?
That's a good question.
I mean, I don't really know why you do it either way. Is the
Yeah,
idea that they're not trying if it's...
it could be, yeah. I mean, I'm completely unfamiliar with the idea of practice sessions. I mean, I've seen it in adult stuff, but yeah, I don't know why you would do it. I mean, they seem to exclude a lot of people. So I don't know if that affects the results. Like you're sort of trimming out all the people that would be bad at doing this.
I think the rationale that they want to use is like, do we know the participants have understood? So do we like we're trying to like assess whether a specific type of cognitive activity is going on. And how
Yeah.
are we certain that actually that cognitive activity happened? And usually this test performance is a specific criteria of test performance is, or threshold is used to asset or to argue that, okay, because they performed to this level, we can claim that this type of cognitive activity was taking place.
That makes
If
sense.
it's
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, there you go. So they also did, while all this was going on, so during this presentation of a single face followed by multiple faces, they were doing sort of eye tracking at the same time. And each face was surrounded by a rectangle indicating an area of interest. I should have put in the dimensions, but basically in the multiple person one, they changed dimensions to the rectangle to make sure that they weren't overlapping. And in the single person, it was a different set of dimensions, but basically they were surrounding each face with a rectangle indicating an area of interest. So most of their analyses are sort of based on saccades towards this area of interest. So they did, or they had these sort of outcomes. Firstly, they wanted to know where and for how long the fixations were happening. So where on the screen and how long, basically, were these fixations sort of taking place. So they have a sort of temporal and a spatial component, and the time to reach the correct location. So which one of the rectangles? Sorry, so you can think that you're presented with a face, it's in your short-term memory, then you're presented with 4 faces, and you saccade towards it, and there's a rectangle around the target one, and the amount of time it takes you to reach that target is interesting, and which of the faces you look at before you reach the target is interesting, and whether you end up in that final place is interesting. So this is sort of what they ended up looking at, right? Does that all make sense? Okay, so they averaged within subject, trial, and locations, and averaged across locations to look for statistical significance. So, what are the sort of hypotheses that they wanted to test with this experiment? And to me, it seemed as if the short-term memory stuff sort of came out of nowhere. So before they were talking about these links between foraging visually and foraging sort of physically. And short-term memory was mentioned once as an example of a sort of top-down factor. But suddenly in the hypotheses, to me, suddenly it was a sort of central part of what they were trying to test. Maybe somebody has some idea of something stupid that I'm missing here. So the hypotheses were the participants will spend more time on a cognate face in the multiple faces trial. That is one where they were shown a single face and it was in the multiple faces, since that face is short-term memory. And this is analogous to patch residence time, where foraging animals will spend more time in a patch with high information value. But I guess this kind of goes back to your point, Sam, that we're talking about food, not information, and there's not really the same trade-offs about leaving food versus leaving information. But I guess the idea is that by showing something and storing in short-term memory, you're showing somebody that it's important. And the idea is that you'll spend more time staring at it because you've been shown that it's important. You look at it, you get more information from it, so it becomes more important. So you get this sort of feedback loop that they described before. And also the participants will adopt a search strategy that minimizes the total time to arrive at that informative image. But I wonder, wouldn't ones not stored in short-term memory be the most informative since you know less about them? But maybe not. So I wondered if you guys had any opinions about this and where the short-term memory thing might have come from.
they're not foraging without a demand, right? Like there's a specific demand put on them saying they have to like find something specific. So I feel like you're referring to a situation where a human is just put in a new space, and obviously everything that might seem novel or that's not immediately in their mind might seem appealing. But here, the requirement is for them to try to find stimuli similar to one that they presumably have stored in their short-term memory, right? At 200 seconds or 200 milliseconds where they're shown stimuli, then there's a gap. Then you have to so your whole goal here is to try to find a similarity between what's stored in your short-term memory and
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I hadn't thought of it that way. Yeah, I mean, I guess if you're like a pigeon and you're looking for petals to eat or something, you presumably have some representation of that. Yeah, that's a really good point.
Why would that? I don't understand why that would mean you spend more time on the thing that you're looking for. Yeah, surely the search is over once you found it. What are they doing with that
What-
buzzer?
There's like,
Playing the piano. Can't you let them in? Why can't you let them in?
well, we're on the 4th floor. We have no mechanism for laying them in. I don't even know who
Oh, I
this is.
see. You haven't got a
They're really
buzzer in
going
that
ham. We can see them through the camera, but is it still the same person? Anyway, sorry.
But anyway,
well,
surely the
what-
point. Surely the point is the search is over when they found it. That's what I don't get.
Well, what I
And-
think. Oh, sorry.
And then they say so. That I was going to say the other thing is, and I don't understand how you can adopt a search strategy that minute. Actually, yeah, sorry, that's fine. What were you going to say to the first one, though?
Well, for the first one, I sort of share the same same question, but I what I think is that because they described a sort of active visual loop early on, where you have an agenda going into looking at something, but the more you look at something, the more it becomes relevant to you, and the more information you extract from it. And so maybe the idea is if you have something that's very relevant, so it's analogous to like if you're a pigeon, you find a branch filled with blossoms, and I saw this morning, and you start eating them. You want to exploit that for as long as there are still blossoms, and then you want to move on, and you want to find an optimal point to transition. And I guess if we're thinking of information absorption, like if information takes the place of blossoms, it's that you have found something that's relevant to you, and you want to sort of make that decision between finding the thing that you're interested in and how long you exploit it for. But as I was saying that, I thought of something wrong with that logic, and I'm trying to remember what it was.
Surely the problem with the logic is all they're looking at is the process of the pigeon up until the point where it. And anyway, what are you saying? Pigeons eat blossoms. Pigeons eat.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that this morning. And
No, they eat the insects that eat blossoms. They don't actually eat the blossoms.
oh, really? I had tons of. Wow. Okay. I completely misinterpreted that situation.
You like
There's a
that
parakeet that does it as well. But I think
they eat insects. But anyway, that's not relevant. Surely the point is that what you're modeling here is not what the pigeon does when they find the blossoms, but the process through which the pigeon finds the blossoms. Yeah.
that's true. Yeah. So this is something, and we'll sort of see it a bit later, but I didn't quite get the link between the experimental methods and what the authors were claiming. And this is part of the reason why, I guess. So I guess maybe a problem is that so they're a priori looking for something and they want to exploit information about it, but you're right, there's no benefit to them exploiting information about the face, right? They need to look long enough to identify it. And for hypothesis 2 to be true, they have to do that before the fixation, right? Because if they want to minimize the total time to arrive at an informative image, pre-saccade, they have to have some idea about where to saccade to minimize the path. Does that make sense? And so actually they kind of already have that information. Okay, so sorry, go.
Yeah.
Raise.
Sorry, I thought someone said they had a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Sorry. Yeah. Thanks, Emma. Sorry, I wasn't
Sorry,
trying to find, I
Narain.
wasn't able to find a good gap. I apologize. No, what I was going to say is like in terms of an analogy, it's actually presuming birds do eat blossoms. It's like trying to find the correct blossom
They
when there
don't
are
eat
three.
blossom.
No. I'm like I couldn't think of insect, the correct insect when there are three insect-like things at the same time, right? So it's like the face itself is the patch, to use your analogy, and they're just trying to find the optimal patch itself. Like that's what I'm not able to like. It's like in terms of
Yeah,
reconnecting it to the original point, it's like there are four things that look like patches, or there are four things that look like insects, or there's only one insect. I don't understand how it directly links to the initial. So it's like they quickly go through these four patch-like things, and then they identify that, oh, there's only fruits in one patch, and they are making an argument saying that they will end up finding the patch with fruits, or I'm mixing between insects and fruits. Let's just stick with patches, guys. So they find the patch with fruits quickly.
yeah. So the information in this case is like the insects or the fruits or whatever, and they're presented with 4 patches, and they want to find the content of the patch which is sort of most relevant to them. And this is like if an animal is feeding, it has some internal representation of what it's going to eat, and it's finding the patch with the highest number of resources, which is the information. And when it's extracted information from that so that it drops below this global average, then it saccades. I think that's what the theory would predict. Thanks, Narain. That's a really good point. Do people follow that? Was that yet?
Yeah, I thought that's what I said earlier, but yeah.
Oh,
I
sorry, I misunderstood you. Sometimes it takes me a while. Okay, so you can see from these results that, broadly speaking, the time to reach a location was shorter and more clustered around the mean for target versus non-target locations, both as a whole and broken down by face quadrant. And
can you make the graphs a bit bigger, please?
yeah, sorry. Is that better?
Yes, I have.
And likewise, they seem to fixate longer. So these are statistically significant, by the way. The authors mention it in the text, but I didn't list it. They look longer in all locations when they're looking at a target versus a non-target face. So this is connected to hypothesis 1. The participants spend, well, both hypotheses, I guess. The participants spend more time on the congruent face, and they take less time to reach that location. So I guess the idea is that this is stored in short-term memory. They're sort of sampling these patches, and they're finding one with this. I still don't quite get this link between something being stored in short-term memory and information content. And it's possible I'm thinking about this wrong. Like if you think about insects, there aren't more insects in a patch because you have Does anyone get this? Am I being stupid?
No, it seems
Feel
weird
like
to me as well. I feel like they could have like given a task where they have to look for something. And it would have
Yeah.
made more sense.
I mean, they kind of did, right? Like this is a task where you have to look for something.
Oh, did they tell them you have to look for a face you've seen?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
So-
Okay.
Oh, and then they click a button that says whether the face was in it or not in it, basically. But they don't seem to, at this point, use that data. So it's all about how quickly they execute towards faces.
Can I
But I
ask-
get, oh, sorry, but just to say, I guess that task does give them a reason to search for things. So it could be that this data is useless, but giving them that thing to try and exploit. And I guess to identify a face, you have to exploit the information in that patch. And so knowing when you have enough information to conclude that it's the target or not is all about getting information like you would get insects, and you have to work out when to take in more information and when to leave that patch. So I think that makes sense. Sorry, Ishil.
sorry, is target the congruent face?
Yeah.
Then why do they have a distinction between target, non-target versus congruent, incongruent?
Oh, sorry. So I'm saying congruent, incongruent. I don't know if it's the language they use.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, this is really dumb. It was how I was thinking about it. Also, this is true 50% of the time, right? Like sometimes there's no target face in the 4 faces. And I'm sure that the authors don't talk about that. I could just be dumb, but I think that they don't. So what I said, they sort of talk about this later, and I think this is about introducing some uncertainty into it, but I'll kind of get into that. Sorry, does anyone have any?
Surely the
sorry.
reason that, sorry, Tom. Surely the reason that they spend longer on the ones that they found it is once they found it, they don't need to keep on looking.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that is, you could think that you still fixate. So fixations are quite small movements sometimes, and I guess that you could fixate within, you could still make very short fixations within a patch. Maybe. But then there's all that eye tracker data saying that when you are gathering more information from something, you make smaller, you have shorter fixations, but more of them. And that this is linked to performance in memory tests. So I wonder if fixation duration is the best measure for something like this. Although there's that other stuff in your biobehavioral review about longer fixations in real world looks. So maybe this is like more real world. But it's a good point.
And can I ask one more thing?
Yeah, of course.
Like if the congruent face is not one of the multiple faces, then like there should be another level to these graphs, right? Because technically they would spend more time in the non-target, which is the whole case.
There
Right.
definitely should be. Is it? I mean, so here's what they say, and they don't mention anything. Yeah, I don't see anything about that, and this confuses me also. What I wonder is, so they talk a bit later about this being a sort of Bayes optimal strategy when there's uncertainty. So it could be that they wanted to, and I don't think they make this clear enough to me, although it's possible that I'm dumb or I read the paper too quickly or something, but I don't think so. That maybe they're introducing this uncertainty so that there is actually a dilemma as to whether you will find something new, which maybe is something like it is to be an animal when you're foraging. Like your big dilemma is that you have some patch that you're exploiting for information, but you might just fruitlessly leap between all of them if there's no target there to find in the first place.
And maybe these are only the cases where there's a congruent face.
Yeah, so that's what I would think. In fact, I'm pretty sure about this. What I suspect, given that they had this counterbalance design where there were multiple faces and then one face, or one face and multiple faces, is that they're using this data for a lot of other stuff. Similar to how the stars data is kind of throwing everything in because people are going to want to use it for a bunch of different reasons. I would suspect they also want to look at stuff like decisions and all of that. So maybe they're only looking at the trials where there's a target face. And I don't see that in the paper. So they were rewarded based on their accuracy. So what I think is that this is just giving them an incentive to actually find the face, maybe, and then they're not actually using it in this analysis. Does that sound reasonable to everyone? But it is confusing, I agree.
So can we make sure we leave a few minutes then to talk about relevance for ADHD?
Yes, okay, I've just got a few more slides. So
all right, okay, we've got 8 minutes after this.
Yeah, let's go through quickly. So basically this is showing that so the color map is I think it's fixation duration or fixation count. Count. And it's just showing that spatially they're looking in the right areas when the target is like bottom left or bottom right, but not entirely. So they aren't always going there. There is this exploration. And then maybe we can skip this, I guess, if we want to talk about ADHD, but I didn't understand this graph at all. And I I put in what the author said about it, and I really hoped that somebody had encountered something similar. So what they're saying that it is how visual behavior was used to sort of explore the search space before settling on the final one, and that I guess firstly that there was this path towards the right answer, but also that apparently the visual search was sort of probabilistic rather than deterministic. That is, once they'd found the right answer, there was still some chance of them leaping to something else. So I put in what the author said about this as well, if that might be helpful.
Carmen, I want to talk about ADHD, Tom Carmen.
Okay, let's do it. Let's ignore that. Okay. So what do they find? Significantly lower latency and longer fixations when the navigator face stored in short-term memory. This process seems to be probabilistic. Participants didn't fixate on a target first and continue to explore the stimuli after fixation on the correct target. This could be a strategy for minimizing arrival time to an optimal informative image. Apparently, the strategy is based optimal in the case where there are 2 or more non-splitting source patches. So this is what I wondered about this uncertainty, where you have 2 or more patches that you can't deplete, that you can get information from or food from, or whatever, always, but there's some uncertainty that you kind of minimize arrival time through this probabilistic jumping. So we know that human cognitive processes exhibit autocorrelation, and the authors think about this like physical patches. So think about this with burstiness discussion last week. And so they predict that similar cognitive paradigms should elicit similar findings. So this is all that stuff we were talking about last week about these sort of clusters followed by jumps. The author's central idea is that this is like an animal foraging for food, and we should think of this maybe as a prototype for these sorts of cognitive processes. So how does this link to ADHD? Well, you can imagine that there's this hyperactivity, this exploitation of physical resources, and then maybe also of this sort of cognitive and visual resources. And I think that with the STARS data, we're pretty well placed to test hypotheses like that, because we have whole room exploration, we have eye tracking, and we have this sort of easy to code behind the table play with neuro data. So I said that really quickly because we wanted to have time to talk about it, but those were my sort of ideas behind the link with ADHD and why it'd be interesting to look at this stuff and stuff.
So what were you talking, Marta, can you remember, Emily P, you on, I think I saw you join. What were you talking about last week that we could just basically do the Kramers and Smith analysis, which is looking at this, you know, neighboring transitions and how that's useful, because we come back to stuff that was in kind of our working memory and how that was beneficial when we were talking about how that would get disrupted in ADHD. Can anyone remember in more detail than I can what we were talking about last week? Marta or MEP?
Well, aren't we talking about like movement, because they move more, so that would mean like how they sample the environment is different.
Yeah, and it's less optimal, right? That it's advantageous to be relatively sequential in that you're toy playing, that you're more likely to come to toy, you're more likely to come back to toys. Exactly what they were saying in that paper is beneficial, yeah. That when we're moving on to neighboring stuff, we're clustering around stuff that helps us to build a working memory representation, because you just like you were saying with the story, yeah, you were saying this idea that you have elements and then you keep on coming back to that element in the story to help build on the working memory representation of the element in the story, yeah. Marta, can you just remind us what that was the whole argument of the paper, right?
Yeah, that's right. Whether it's more optimal one over the other, I guess it's debatable.
But she was saying it's the same structure. The way in which we play with toys has got the same. That was your
it has the same structure. It has the same properties, statistical properties as a narrative, no? So you have the main topic, as in like the main toys, and then you go back into a slight tangent, like where you add new details in case of the story, or where you play with new toys, and then you go back to the same topic, as in like the same toy. Whether this is a more optimal way to play, it's another thing. I think that what was their point was it fits with the narrative, and the narrative is known to be like conveying meaningful information. Therefore, probably a play like this conveys information, but nobody, like, I guess one could argue that also it depends on like whether you explore one single toy very in a lot of depth versus all the toys in less depth. I don't know if that makes sense.
I mean, I guess something interesting about this is that you could think that in this case, or with foraging, you have a defined end goal. It's not, I mean, what I was thinking was that the structure of this sort of toy play is similar to what the authors say foraging is like. That is, you know, you get this period of exploitation, then a leap, then a period of exploitation. But it's not clear what you're optimizing in the case of play. Information gathered about, I mean, maybe you're right, Sam, it's information that allows you to build a working memory representation. But this doesn't seem like play.
This isn't. No, yeah.
Unless play is a practice for partly foraging and partly other cognitive processes that we might expect to be like foraging, if foraging is a prototype for other cognitive processes.
Well, Chen uses this stuff where he takes all the head camera footage of toys that kids get when they're playing, and then uses that to train a machine learning classifier to get a representation of what that toy is. Yeah. But it would
Well,
be, yeah, so that's what the aim is, to build a internal representation of what that toy is. Yeah. That'd be one way of thinking about the aim. But it's easier to think about the same idea in the context of telling a story, because then you can look at how well they can remember the story. Yeah, how much do you have one element and then keep on coming back to it as a way of helping children to retain the key elements of a story. But it's basically the same idea. It's like how you present content and then return to that content in order to help people to build a memory representation of it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the author's argument would be that that is like foraging. That it's useful to think of foraging as a prototype for those functions. But it feels like it's missing the point of play a little bit.
I mean, not necessarily, but
Well, what's motivating about play, I guess? Why do children enjoy doing it in the moment? Like, it feels intrinsically good, but what's driving that? Is it the same thing that means that it feels good to forage for stuff?
I don't know that. Yeah, you could say it's just kind of social experimentation. But anyway, we've got to go. But well done, round of applause for Tom.
I hope that was interesting, everyone. Thank
Well
you for the help
done, very
understanding
good.
this paper.
Very nice, and very nice connections to what we were talking about last week. So yeah. Good. See you next week at 2:30 then.
Bye.
All right.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the question.